Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in... Ooh, crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
It's the turn of the 20th century. The CIA is a little lost. The Cold War is over, and its main mission is to wage a war on drugs it doesn't really believe in. But then it starts to get intelligence about an outfit called Al-Qaeda. And when planes fly into the World Trade Center on that terrible day in 2011, the CIA begins its fateful war on terror. Welcome to the Spymasters Podcast. And in this episode, I'm talking to the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Tim Weiner about his new book, The Mission, the CIA in the 21st Century. It's the follow-up to his brilliant Legacy of Ashes about the CIA in the 20th century. So don't forget to give us a like, follow, subscribe, help me to keep bringing you all the best writers about intelligence. And now I'll hand you over to me talking to Tim Weiner about terror, torture, and Trump. So, Tim, thank you so much for coming on the Spymasters Podcast.
My pleasure.
We're here to talk about your new book, The Mission, the CIA in the 21st Century. Now, this is a follow-up to Legacy of Ashes, which I also read and completely adored. And I approached this one with some trepidation because I didn't know if you could do it twice. But it turns out you can. It's wonderful. I wanted to ask, before we get into the meat of the book, there's a bit in the opening where you talk about, as a young reporter, going on a visit to the CIA, and you describe it as finding your life's calling, which I thought was quite an interesting way of talking about it. Could you just expand on that for a little bit? Why do you think it became your calling, and what has it meant for you?
Well, I got my foot in the door at CIA back in early 1987. I had earlier in the previous fall set off for a reporting trip to Afghanistan, then under Soviet occupation. And I called up the CIA. The CIA has and always has had a public information office, an inherent contradiction in its title. And I spoke to the gentleman who ran it. And I said, I understand you people sometimes do country briefings for reporters who are off to strange places. How about it? Because I want to write about your very large and not terribly secret covert operation to ship lethal weapons to the Afghan resistance. And he said, absolutely not, hung up. So off I went, banged off to Afghanistan, and I came back 3 months later in one piece. And I hadn't been back at my desk in Washington for more than a day, and the phone rang. Guess who? It was my new best friend from the CIA. Tim, how are you? He said, how would you like to come in for that briefing now? And I said, I'd be delighted. So you walk into the original headquarters building of the CIA, and on the left-hand wall, in great bas-relief letters, it says, from the Gospel of John, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And at that point, I thought, well, now, I think I want to cover these people as a beat, like I'd cover the cops in the courts as a rookie reporter. And here we are 38 years later.
Can I ask another question about you and your calling? There is one part of the book where you talk about the similarities between being a journalist and an intelligence officer. And I just wondered, given your kind of lifetime calling to uncover the secrets of the CIA, has there ever been a moment where you think, I wish instead of reporting on it, I had done it?
No. I'm not a skillful liar. I mean, part of the job description, if you are a CIA officer operating overseas, is that you do have to lie, cheat, and steal and deceive people about who you are. The affinities, though, are strong. Both the spy and the reporter want to uncover secrets. We want to take the lid off things and look inside at the works and figure out what makes power tick. And And we can both, parachute into places, as I have, like Khartoum in Sudan or Jalalabad in Afghanistan, and say, hello, take me to your leader. Oftentimes you will be taken. The similarities end there. I mean, CIA officers will pay handsomely for information. We ink-stained wretches don't do that. And they are bound by secrecy, and we are bound by openness and information and disclosure. But you sit down with a CIA officer and you get to know one another over time. And sometimes you click. And it's a great experience for me to understand. And it takes time what these people do, what their lives are like, how they think, and how an intelligence operation works or doesn't.
Right. So in the book, we get a kind of dual perspective, I guess, always from the top. We're a lot in the White House and we're a lot in the headquarters of the CIA, but you're also quite a lot on the ground with various CIA officers, which I think lends the book an incredible kind of depth and detail. It broadly splits, I think, into 3 time periods that maybe we could talk about. The first one is the immediate pre-9/11 period and the run-up to that, and then immediately afterwards. So before 9/11, you talk about the CIA being kind of a bit listless. It had lost its sense of mission. It was reluctantly kind of involved in the war on drugs, which it didn't think it could win, but it didn't have any other kind of overarching mission. Is that a fair characteristic?
Yeah. In the decade before 9/11, the CIA was adrift, like a ship in chains. The wind had gone out of its sails. The Soviet Union had vanished. How could the CIA be a great intelligence service without a great enemy? So they were quite lost, really. What is the mission? Why are we here? What are we doing? In 1988, Al-Qaeda blew up 2 American embassies in East Africa, one in Nairobi and one in Dar es Salaam. And for Al-Qaeda to conduct 2 terrorist operations at once, 3,000 miles from its base in Afghanistan, well, this was something new. And it dawned on the operations officers and on their directors that counterterrorism might replace anti-communism as the modus operandi. This became the mission, and in the months before the 9/11 attacks, there were a small but growing number of officers who were absolutely dedicated to figuring out who was Al-Qaeda. Who are these people? How do they move around? How do they move money? How do they get passports? They're not just sitting in a cave in Afghanistan. They're plotting something. But what? And the terrible thing is, on the 12th of September 2001, the CIA knew very little about Al-Qaeda. And if they'd had a great dossier and understand who was who in the zoo of Al-Qaeda, perhaps the secret prisons and the torture wouldn't have been necessary. But they didn't. And it was for a want of intelligence that the counterterrorism service, which literally multiplied tenfold within the CIA within a matter of months, with an infusion of more than $1 billion and thousands of officers and analysts, it was the search for intelligence that led to black sites and waterboarding.
Just briefly, though, on that run-up to the September 11th, you do make the point that although the CIA wasn't where it could have been, I think you'd said that Bush had received 36 warnings from the CIA that there was an attack coming, and that the White House was not at all interested in Al-Qaeda, and the CIA were trying to create a sense of urgency, but it wasn't felt in the White House. And this is a theme, the kind of disconnect between the White House and the CIA, that emerges throughout your book.
The CIA knew that something terrible was about to happen, but the time and the place and the manner of it, they did not know. But they were certainly trying to alert the White House, the president, the National Security Council, the State Department, the Pentagon, to go on a war footing. Al-Qaeda had declared war on the United States. But none of this was taken seriously by the president or the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State, really. Richard Helms, the Cold War director of CIA under Presidents Johnson and Nixon, once said, "It's not enough to ring the bell. You have to make sure the other person hears it." They didn't hear it.
It seemed that, even in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, President W. Bush was so obsessed with Iraq that he couldn't see... Even when there had been a demonstrable kind of, moment where the enemy was, Iraq.
When you go over these events, you feel continuously that you are watching a terrible tragedy happening in slow motion. Bush, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, and their acolytes in the national security establishment were dead set on going after Saddam Hussein before 9/11. And on the day after 9/11, Bush turned to one of his counterterrorism aides and said, see if Saddam did this. Well, Saddam didn't do it. Saddam and Osama bin Laden had nothing in common. And see, here's the great rub. These people were ideologues. And by that, I mean the Bush administration, not Al-Qaeda. And ideology is the enemy of intelligence. If you are an ideologue, your mind is made up. You don't need intelligence. And you develop an invincible ignorance about the way the world works.
Right. And that led them into some terrible and treacherous waters. And you are not kind to George W. Bush in this book. He does not come out of it well.
He will certainly go down as one of the worst presidents in American history, although the present occupant of the White House currently holds the number one position.
We will go on definitely to talk about Trump. I mean, one of the things I thought fascinating, though, in this period is you talk about the CIA operation in Afghanistan. And as you point out, which I guess I hadn't quite thought of it in these terms, it's the longest kind of CIA warfare operation apart from Vietnam, because the CIA go into Afghanistan after 9/11 and then they're there, that's it. They're there. They're entrenched for decades. So but the other thing you make very clear is there was no post-war planning at all. And that's extraordinary with hindsight.
The Bush White House created a strategic void and would not look over the horizon. They could not see past the edge of their desks. And one of the things intelligence is supposed to do is to inform policy, to inform strategy, and to give the president and his top people an ability to peer out over the horizon and look at to see what might be happening. And this is one of the tragedies of the Bush era.
Right. And his relationship with the CIA is fascinatingly tortured. I mean, you say at one point that he considers it a sort of leftist organization that is trying to obstruct.
It's Oedipal, his father, with whom he had a tortured relationship, the first President Bush, had been director of the CIA for 11 months back in the 70s. And he loved the CIA. George Bush the elder did. His son decidedly did not. Yes, he thought it was a cabal of striped pants professors and cocktail party dilettantes and closet liberals. It is none of those things.
Towards the end of the book, you have one of your CIA people that you talk to getting sort of having a righteous fury about about the actions of individual powerful men having such calamitous effects on humanity. And just listening to you talk there about W. Bush, it does seem that the idea that some of the greatest foreign policy debacles of American recent history that have got such knock-on effects down the decades are caused by someone's daddy issues is it's horrific.
When intelligence succeeds, and it does from time to time, it can save lives. It can start a war. But when intelligence fails, as it often does, it can help start a war. Intelligence failures, however, are more often than not policy failures of the president. But when the policy fails, the CIA gets it in the neck every time.
In terms of intelligence starting wars, obviously we need to talk about weapons of mass destruction. Now, the way you tell that story, it feels like it was both the CIA and Bush at fault for that particular debacle?
Yes. The CIA famously declared that Saddam Hussein possessed or was on the verge of possessing nuclear weapons capabilities, chemical warfare capabilities, biological warfare capabilities. And none of that was true because the CIA didn't have any intelligence on Iraq. The freshest intelligence it had was dated from 1988 when Saddam threw out the UN weapons inspectors, and with them the CIA, who had used the UN for cover. And it convinced itself. The president didn't skew the CIA's intelligence; the CIA skewed itself. That being said, as I quote Luis Rueda, who conceived a largely successful covert action plan to penetrate Saddam's military and intelligence service with spies. Luis said they, meaning the Bush White House, would have gone to war if Saddam had a rubber band and a paper clip to put their eyes out.
Right. That was Yeah, and you point out that in their discussions with the MI6 in the lead up to it, MI6 were under the impression that the war was so inevitable that actually, whatever they said, it wouldn't tip the balance in favour of waging war or not.
To paraphrase what they said, the facts were being fitted around the policy. That is a very dangerous thing.
You didn't talk much, I felt, up to the reputational damage to the CIA. I mean, you talked about the knock-on effect within the organisation and with its relationship with the White House, etc. But in broader terms, debacle over the weapons of mass destruction. I mean, I know in the UK it massively tarnished the reputation of the intelligence services for a long, long time.
When, nearly 20 years later, in the fall of 2020, the CIA, having run a brilliant 4-year series of operations to try and penetrate the Kremlin, had stolen Vladimir Putin's war plans for Ukraine. The intelligence was declassified, and the president and secretary of state told the world about it, that Putin was going to attack Ukraine. And collectively, the nations of NATO cocked an eyebrow and said, all right, aren't you the people that told us Saddam had weapons of mass destruction? The stench had not evaporated nearly 2 decades thereafter.
Do you think that enough water has passed under the bridge now? Do you think that weapons of mass destruction is now a historical thing rather than
It is a stain that will not out.
Right. You then in the book explore the CIA's role in the war on terror, and you basically say that the officers out in the field all over the Middle East effectively are kind of on their own. They're not really getting any support that they need from CIA headquarters nor from the White House, and that it's basically rather a debacle.
Well, I mean, that's not entirely true. If you talk broadly about the attack on Al-Qaeda, the CIA didn't set up the secret prisons and the water boards on its own. The president of the United States authorized that, and it's on him as well as the CIA. This is a classic example of the CIA taking the fall for the president's decision.
Yeah, so this issue of the torture, now you explore this in some depth in the book, and I found all this absolutely fascinating. The kind of position for those advocates for it within CIA was that it was legitimate effectively to do amoral things in order to prevent future attacks and future deaths. Do you have any sympathy for that view?
The great advantage that the CIA and the United States had for a long time was in the recruitment of foreign agents, in the projection of American power around the world, is that America stood for freedom and democracy. And in the decade after the end of the Cold War, up to September 11, 2001, the number of democracies in the world increased until at the start of the 21st century, the number of democracies in the world and the number of autocracies in the world was roughly equal. It's something that had never happened before in the history of civilization. And with the advent of the American response to 9/11, the number of democracies in the world flatlined and declined. The heart and soul of the CIA is the recruitment of foreign agents to act as spies on America's behalf. The bond between the CIA officer and the recruited agent is, in large part, a criminal conspiracy to commit treason against the agent's country. Now, agents, recruited foreign agents from countries like Russia or Iran, came to the CIA for a variety of motives: revenge, money, but also a desire to change the world around them and to oppose the autocratic regimes in which they lived. Now, that is a problematic matter these days, when the lights on the shining city of the hill are going out. America is a failing democracy. It is becoming an autocracy under Donald Trump. And to give you a concrete example, not too many days ago, the United States, in bombing Iran, bombed the notorious Evian prison in Iran, where political prisoners were being held, and killed scores of people. Now, what do you think that does for the ability of the CIA to recruit Iranian agents among the brave opposition in Iran?
But we'll talk about the Trump bit because you're obviously you have strong opinions there. But you also date the loss of that sort of moral authority very much to the invasion of Iraq and all this.
Absolutely.
And the CIA's use of terrible methods. I think, in fact, you said there's a lovely sentence. You say less than a year after 9/11, the search for intelligence had led the US to adopt the methods of its worst enemies. The waterboard would become an indelible symbol of a secret government gone haywire, which also struck me as being weirdly sort of fuel to the kind of MAGA conspiracy. So this sort of secret state stuff also was amplified by Bush allowing the CIA to go slightly rogue, do you think?
Well, the CIA didn't go rogue. The President of the United States authorized them to do these things. So it's not as if the CIA had slipped its leash.
Sure.
When back in 1970, there was a famous and very impressive United States Senate investigation of what the CIA had been up to in the first 25 years of the Cold War. And the senator who led the committee, Frank Church, put out the idea that perhaps the CIA had been a rogue elephant trampling nations and people. Well, listen, when the elephant tramples people, it's not the elephant's fault. It is the fault of the mahout, the elephant driver. And that is the President of the United States. The CIA is an executor of foreign policy. It does not make the policy.
Right. No, absolutely. Point taken. The other impact of being an agent of a failing and misguided foreign policy is, as you point out, they create a kind of problem in Iraq where the nature of the war means they're breeding terrorists faster than the CIA or the US Army can capture them or kill them.
Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. Black Friday Game Day on Prime is an epic day of live sports. It all starts at 9 a.m. Eastern with the Capital One Skins game. Then, Black Friday football returns when the Bears take on the Eagles at 3 p.m. And it culminates with the final night of Emirates NBA Cup Group play with Bucks Knicks at 7 p.m. and Mavs Lakers at 10 p.m. Black Friday Game Day, only on Prime.
It dawned on America's military and intelligence leaders that the problem, you could not kill your way out of the problem of terrorism. You created enemies as fast as you could slay them. We have found to our sorrow that when you cross the line in this way, when you adapt the methodologies of your enemies, you are becoming the thing that you oppose. You know, the waterboard and the other attendant tortures. Basis for this was studies that the CIA and the military had conducted of Americans who survived captivity in North Vietnam, among other places. And the North Vietnamese tortured their American prisoners, largely downed pilots, not for information, but to create propaganda out of false confessions, a fact that seemed to have been overlooked when the CIA adopted the waterboard and other methods. They are effective in extracting false confession as well as extracting truth.
Given that, do you think there was an element, I mean, you talk in the book about the kind of fear and loathing in the aftermath of 9/11. Do you think there was an element of something a bit darker in the decision to adopt those methods, something a bit revenge-driven?
You know, one of the themes of the book is, and CIA officers who were engaged in Afghanistan, in Iraq, is that we didn't know what we were doing. We made it up as we went along. The CIA was not created to be a lethal paramilitary force, nor to erect prisons, nor to torture confessions out of people. That is not the job description. And so the people who were assigned to these tests had no idea what they were doing. And furthermore, they knew that the CIA and the United States would be called to account for this someday. It is very hard to keep a secret in America.
The other problem, as you point out in the book, is that while the CIA is sort of being turned into a paramilitary force and a prison camp operator, there's a rising threat that they've completely taken their eye off, right? So while they're occupied in these things, they've let go of their more traditional pursuits of espionage and counter-espionage. But the old enemy, Russia, hasn't. And there's a new kid on the block, China. And both of them are ramping up at exactly this time.
Well, I want to underscore two things here. One is that we Americans are relatively new at the business of running a civilian intelligence service. The Russians have been at it since Peter the Great, the British since Queen Elizabeth I, and the Chinese since Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War 26 centuries ago. There is a learning curve here that is measured in centuries. Second, for 15 years after 9/11, counterterrorism swamped everything at the CIA. And as you point out, espionage and counterintelligence were diminished as a consequence. That changed at the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017. When it became clear that Vladimir Putin and the Russian intelligence services had monkey-wrenched the 2016 presidential election through covert action and sabotage to elect Donald Trump. It was, as one former CIA director, General Mike Hayden, pointed out, it was the most successful covert operation since the Trojan horse. And at the beginning of 17, there was a new chief spy, a new head of the clandestine service, and his name, unknown to Americans until now, until the publication of the book, was Thomas Rakusan. And Tom Rakusan's roots were Czech. He was 9 years old when Soviet tanks rolled into Prague in the spring of 1968 to crush the popular resistance to Soviet domination of Czechoslovakia. His hatred of the Russians was bred in the bone. So he called in all his top people in the CIA's clandestine service, most of whom had been running counterterrorism operations for 10 or 15 years. And he said, look here, the Russians just manipulated our freaking elections. How are we going to make sure this never happens again? And he told his top people, take the skills that you have learned in targeting terrorists over the past generation. And by targeting, I don't mean putting warheads on foreheads. I mean, identifying them, figuring out who they are, how they live, who they love, who they hate, with the intent of recruiting them. Take those talents and turn it on the Russians. Target Russian intelligence officers, diplomats, oligarchs, and with the goal of penetrating the Kremlin, which had been among the highest goals of CIA since its creation in 1947. And lo and behold, 4 years later, they did. And they stole Putin's war plans for Ukraine. And that is a remarkable thing. And so in the process, by the beginning of the Biden administration in 2021, espionage had returned to its proper place of prominence at CIA.
There's an interesting bit. So in the run-up to the first Trump election, the CIA become aware that the Russians are attempting to manipulate things. But it puts Obama in a very difficult position, doesn't it? Because if he sort of goes public with this, A, it doesn't convince Trump supporters either way because they think he's lying. B, it looks like he's trying to tip the scales of the election. Like, I think you press the thumb on the scales of the election. It puts him in quite a difficult position because he doesn't know quite what to do with that information.
Yes. And tragically, CIA was not allowed to go public with its irrefutable findings that Putin was manipulating the election until it was too late.
You say the way you describe Trump is effectively, if not actually a Russian asset, then at least a useful idiot. I mean,
Well, we now know the answer to this question. For a decade, journalists, as well as spies and diplomats and well-informed American citizens, were wondering, what is the nature of Trump's bromance with Vladimir Putin? Is he conceivably an agent of the Russian Federation? God forbid. Well, the answer is now clear. Donald Trump is not an agent of Russia. He is an ally of Russia and has acted as an ally of Russia in his second term ever since he directed the United States to vote with the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians against a resolution condemning the Russian occupation of Ukraine on the third anniversary of the invasion. Imagine what a CIA officer among the hundreds and hundreds who have worked for more than a decade to help ensure the survival of Ukraine, what their reaction to this was. The President of the United States had gone over to the other side. The CIA has spent nearly 80 years fighting Russian imperialism, and it is a head-spinning, nauseating, gut-wrenching sense of betrayal.
Because one of the big concerns was, I mean, there are many concerns, obviously, with Trump's relationship with Russia. One of the concerns was there would be a problem for other friendly intelligence agencies in sharing intelligence with Trump, who is at best cavalier and at worst malevolent with regards to intelligence over Russia. Is there any sense, do you have any notion of whether that fear has come to pass? Are they still sharing intelligence in the same way, or has it had a knock-on effect?
The CIA depends mightily on its alliances with foreign intelligence services, and not just in friendly allied nations, but in nations that you wouldn't put on the top of the list of, fans of the United States. It cannot be a global intelligence service without these alliances. It hasn't the languages. It hasn't the country experience. It hasn't the people sufficient to cover the globe. Donald Trump has ripped up these alliances. He has taken a wrecking ball to the architectures of American national security that have existed since the end of World War II. He has also installed a quartet of crackpots and fools in the top positions of the national security establishment. At the Pentagon, you have the white Christian nationalist Pete Hegseth, former Fox News host. At the Directorate of National Intelligence, which is the bureaucracy that ostensibly oversees America's 18 different intelligence agencies, you have the conspiracy theorist and Putin apologist Tulsi Gabbard at the helm. Over at the FBI, which has extensive national security and intelligence directorates, you have the MAGA acolyte Kash Patel, who is destroying and undermining those very directorates that aim at the foreign enemies of the United States. And at the CIA, you have John Ratcliffe, who was a 3-term Texas congressman and a personal injury lawyer and a big Fox News booster of Trump's agenda. And he has, in 6 short months, forced out some of the most experienced people in the operations and analytical directorates, has keelhauled everyone the CIA hired in 2023 and 2024 at the behest of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, and he has a proven track record of this, twisted intelligence to please the president. The instruments of American national security are in the hands of amateurs and toadies, and this is a very dangerous thing.
I mean, it's obviously dangerous practically, but I did think it was, after reading your book, there's a philosophical danger there as well, because you talk about the director of the CIA. You talk about this in the context of when General Petraeus lost his job over a sex scandal, but you say that the director of the CIA gains a lot of his authority from the fact that he claims the moral authority to command amoral acts, I think is how you put it. So if both your CIA director and the commander-in-chief have no kind of moral authority, that, the whole system just has no legitimacy.
It does great damage to the CIA's relationships with its overseas allies. It does great damage to the CIA's ability to recruit foreign agents in the name of American democracy and freedom. And it does great reputational damage, as you say, the moral authority of intelligence officers to engage in what are amoral acts in the name of the United States. There is an even greater danger, and I do not want to be a doomsayer, and I know from experience that he who lives by the crystal ball ends up eating broken glass. But I want your listeners to do a thought experiment here. Given what has happened in the United States in the past 6 months, the attacks on civil liberties, on democratic norms, on legal restraints on presidential power, imagine what would happen if, due to the incompetent leadership at the CIA and at the other national security agencies in the United States, imagine what would happen if the United States were attacked again, at home or abroad. What would Trump do? It is not beyond the realm of possibility that he would declare martial law or cancel elections. And, the conservative majority that he's installed on the Supreme Court has essentially said the president is a king. He cannot be called to account for crimes committed in office. Here we are, the United States. We are on the verge of our 250th anniversary as a democratic nation. No free republic in the history of civilization has lasted longer than 300 years, and that is the Roman Empire.
You posed the question in the book as well. I mean, it's the same question, just slightly differently phrased, I guess, of what should the CIA do when the president of the United States is a direct threat to national security? Now, the problem is that the CIA is bound by its mission to be the kind of part of a democratic country. So it's bound by its own strictures not to do anything if the president is a direct threat to national security. Because if it does anything, then you're in a different but equal world of pain.
CIA officers, like military officers, swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, not to the president. The president and his CIA director have made it clear that loyalty to the president is a job requirement at CIA, and have imposed ideological tests on people slated for top positions. Who did you vote for? What did you think about the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol? Who do you think won the 2020 election? Well, this is madness. Presidents in the past, and I'm specifically talking about Presidents Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon in the 60s and 70s, have ordered the CIA to spy on Americans. That is not in its charter. It is a foreign intelligence service. You want to spy on Americans? Call in the FBI and get a warrant, a judicial warrant. And they have, past presidents have ordered the CIA to overthrow democratically elected leaders who were leftists. And I'm thinking specifically in the 1950s of Iran and Guatemala, the coups there, and in Chile in the 1970s against another freely elected leader, Salvador Allende. So what would happen, again, a thought experiment, if the president decided to overthrow the government of Greenland, which he has eyes on possessing, and in doing so subvert the government of Denmark, which is the protector of Greenland? Or what if the president ordered the CIA to conduct a coup in Panama in order to seize the Panama Canal? His imperial designs on those two countries were made manifest in his inaugural address back in January. The epigraph of the book is a quotation from the CIA's director of training in the Cold War, a fellow named Hugh Cunningham. And he told thousands of CIA officers in their training phase, we must have the greatest immorality and we must have the greatest morality. Only CIA officers with the greatest morality would refuse an unconstitutional, an illegal, or even an unwise order. But we will not find out about this in real time, whether there are members of the senior ranks of the CIA who have joined the resistance.
Do you think there are do you think there are grounds for optimism? I mean, the CIA as an organization has survived many an antagonistic president and has we've concentrated on some of the failures today, but your book is also full of amazing detail on some of its fantastic successes over the course of the 21st century. So is it possible to draw a seed of optimism from you to finish with?
My mother was born in Nuremberg in 1924. And after Hitler held his Nuremberg rallies, she and her family moved to Paris. And they went, after Paris fell, my mother, and 17, and her mother, aged 50, went from Paris to Marseille, to Casablanca, and they got the second to last boat that carried German Jewish refugees across the Atlantic, ending their journey in Havana, where she spent the next 2 years in a refugee camp. And on the boat, as it set sail west, she looked up at the stars and said, thank you for saving my life, and I promise to be worthy to lead a good life here on it. So I got a lot of optimism from her growing up. She became a noted history professor, and I am an inveterate optimist. I believe, as the saying goes, that God loves fools, babies in the United States. If we survive as a constitutional democracy until the next election, then there is a chance for a renewal of our democratic system of government. I think that an intelligence service in the hands of an autocrat is a very dangerous thing. And the world is increasingly dangerous these days. And it will, take a great deal of luck for us to survive the next 3.5 years. If we do, and I think we can, we will see a rebirth of, this country's values and, a functioning intelligence service that can provide warnings of dangers over the horizon and inform a wise president can survive. We'll need an awful lot of luck.
Well, on that note, Tim, with all of us hoping that we've got an awful lot of luck coming, thank you so much for coming on the Spymasters podcast. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow, tweet, spread the word so that we can keep bringing you more brilliant writers talking about spies. Don't miss an episode of the Spymasters podcast.